Thank you for taking part in this brief Bible dive with Beautiful Savior Lutheran Church in Bloomfield Hills, Michigan, and with me, Pastor Nick. We offer these brief Bible dives as ways to help you dive into a Bible story in a bite-sized, time manageable way, about 10 to 15 minutes. We don't try to cover the entire story. We just try to get at something interesting or some historical thing that can give us insight into the story and how it might apply to our lives throughout our week, throughout our months, throughout our years. Also, if you are interested in subscribing, we'd love for you to subscribe to our YouTube channel and then click where you can receive notifications. You can learn then when more brief Bible dives and other things that we post are placed online. So as you take part in this brief Bible dive with me now, I invite you to consider two questions throughout the whole thing. First, why is it important for me to give to God? You know, God owns everything after all, so why is it important for me to give to God? And second, how can I feel my giving? How can I feel my giving to God even more? The story we're going to use for this is Mark chapter 12, verse 38, through Mark chapter 13, verse 2. And we use the New Revised Standard Version. If you're following along with a different version of the Bible, that's just fine. This is just the one that we use with Beautiful Savior. This is the reading. As Jesus taught, he said, "Beware of the scribes who like to walk around in long robes and be greeted with respect in the marketplaces and to have the best seats in the synagogues and places of honor at banquets. They devour widows' houses, and for the sake of appearance, say long prayers. They will receive the greater condemnation." He sat down opposite the treasury and watched the crowd putting money into the treasury. Many rich people put in large sums. A poor widow came and put in 2 small copper coins, which are worth a penny. Then he called his disciples and said to them, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all those who have contributed to the treasury, who are contributing to the treasury, for all of them have contributed out of their abundance. But she, out of her poverty, has put in everything she had, all she had to live on." As he came out of the temple, one of his disciples said to him, "Look, teacher, what large stones and what large buildings." Then Jesus asked him, "Do you see these great buildings? Not one stone will be left here upon another. All will be thrown down." This is one of those stories where Jesus explains how God's economy works differently from the economies of this world. He compared rich people putting in large sums of money into the temple treasury with a poor widow who contributed 2 small copper coins. And then he said that she gave more than those who gave the larger sums, because she gave everything she had left. They contributed out of their abundance. She contributed out of her poverty. The message of the story is pretty straightforward, especially how it stands in contrast to the story right before about the ostentatious religious leaders, and then the story right afterwards where one of Jesus's disciples are just enamored by the large stones and the large buildings. The story is pretty straightforward, and it's that it's important for us to feel our giving and for our giving to be sacrificial and worshipful. We should feel it. It's not about showing off or bragging about our giving. It's about feeling giving to God. And that's part of what makes it an act of worship. But to understand the historical nature of this better, we're going to take this time to examine the actual copper coins that the poor widow would have given and how money and currency operated in the world at that time, and why it really is an act of faith and an act of worship. So beginning with these coins, which Mark also mentioned in English we hear, were worth a penny. A penny. Perhaps you recall hearing this story from other versions of the Bible, other translations, I should say, and you hear it referred to as the widow's mite, and how they might have been worth a farthing. Other interpretations use different words. But in the original Greek, these were called leptons. These were the smallest coins minted in Palestine at the time. And Mark also mentioned in Greek that they were worth about a quadrantes, which is obviously a difficult word to pronounce. Quadrantes. It was a form of Roman currency. And he mentioned this for the sake of his Roman readers, who probably would not have been familiar with Palestinian currency, much in the same way that we translate the word as penny, or as we had farthing, just to better understand the point. So these coins were a form of money, but they were also a form of currency. And so here's the distinction between money and currency. Money is anything that has value and can be used as a payment for goods and services, while currency is an authoritatively issued medium for these exchanges, and that promises to have an inherent value, maybe gold or silver, or now, as we have with the US dollar, simply the promise of the one who issues it. A person would have had to know the constantly changing exchange rate of salt in comparison to bread, bread in comparison to wood, wood in comparison to pottery, an innumerable other number of fluid exchange rates in a society without a common currency. The person would also have to travel with those rather large goods in order to make a market exchange, since the goods are the money itself. So currency, therefore, allows for markets and the transfer of value to work more efficiently, as it allows for disparate items to have a means of value comparison. And for this reason, all currency is money, but not all money is currency. Again, currency is an authoritatively issued medium for financial exchanges. Money can come in all sorts of forms. Certainly, things such as cattle and salt can be used by people for money, but they can also have a very practical use. But human beings have given them a value and have therefore turned them into forms of money. Often, the reason that these items are used as money initially is because a society kind of has an extra value on them, maybe even developed customs or a mythology around the object. For example, ancient Guatemalans used corn as money. It had a sacred place in society. Mongolians used tea. Norwegians utilized butter. Aztecs utilized sacrificed humans, even sold the sacrificed remains of those human beings in local meat markets. I mean, can't even get our head wrapped around that probably. Siberian tribes utilized reindeer. I mean, these were items that became forms of money because they were so central to the society's belief systems. And actually, as a result of it, we have adopted a lot of words and phrases in English from these forms of money. For example, the Latin word sal meant salt, and a pretty similar word in Latin, salario, means of salt. Well, salt was often used to pay Roman soldiers, and so we have adopted the word salary to describe payment for work. Maybe a less commonly used word in English, but I bet a few people here will know it, is the word pecuniary. This comes from the Latin word pecuniarius, which means wealth in cattle. The English word capital comes from the word chattel. Roman mythology held that the goddess Juno Moneta presided over affairs of the state, which included the issuing of state-sponsored money. Her last name, Moneta, is what gave rise to words like money and mint in English, as well as moneda in Spanish and mark and munza in German. Also, coins were actually minted in Moneta's temple, those same words. The British colonies in North America depended on deer for survival, including the skin of a deer for warmth. So that's why a lot of us in the United States keep referring to money as bucks. So there were all forms of money, but a major advancement took place when governments began minting coins as official currency with a consistent and relatively dependable value, and authoritatively set the currency as a standard for trade. What most people consider when they hear the term money, namely currency, really didn't exist as a concept during most of the events that were happening in the Old Testament. Most of them occurred before a currency happened. So our most basic unit of currency, though, the coin, it was developed by the Kingdom of Lydia between about 640 and 630 BC. Now the Mesopotamians, they had already devised ingots, such as minas and shekels and talents that were not necessarily standardized or always transportable, sometimes gigantic. But the Lydians recognized that commerce would be better and more effective if they minted objects that were small and represented only a little amount of work, hence the coin. This is how the Kingdom of Lydia quickly became exceedingly rich. We even have a legend about their wealthy king Croesus, and that phrase, as rich as Croesus, has entered our English language. Well, the original purpose, though, of currency was never to be the end source of value, rather a means for the transfer of value. Currency quickly assumed the role of chief possessor of value because it is a highly effective tool. It has the power to connect unrelated things with one another by allowing for a value comparison. And this all was understood by the Lydian kings who invented coinage. The kingdom's standardization of a monetary unit that held the authoritative backing of the government, including a stamp that verified its worth, this gave people the confidence and the trust and the faith to use the item in daily trade. The same mixture was used to make each coin. At first it was electrum, and eventually pure gold and silver, thus giving that consistency and dependability. This act also eliminated the need to weigh ingots. It sped up commerce. You had less chance of faked weights or fake ingots. One can actually summarize the effect of the Lydian invention of coining, and therefore of a standardized currency, as developing a form of money in which people could place more trust and faith. A person's greater trust and faith in the coin led to a greater power and effect in its commercial use. The increase in people's faith in their money, now a currency, then had these indirect results on the Lydian people. It actually led to a greater speed of rights as well as vices. On the right side, women in Lydia actually were allowed to choose their own husbands as well as set their own dowries. In the book of Acts, we hear about a prominent businesswoman and head of her household, also named Lydia, who lived in the area where this kingdom had once been. After had been absorbed into other empires. And she was a powerful woman. She had a house in her church, a church in her house. Conversely, the first brothels to be excavated have been found in this area. Lydians have also been credited with the invention of dice and a large expansion of games of chance and gambling. Why did all this occur? It's because people could place greater faith in their money, now currency. Faith is required for currency to exist. In fact, when faith in currency diminishes or even vanishes, societies can experience disasters. We have economic terms for this: faltering currency, failing currency, hyperinflation. The classic example from the 20th century is the Weimar Republic that was set up in Germany after the end of World War I, and the hyperinflation that followed, the wheelbarrows full of cash that people pushed to buy just a loaf of bread. The main point of this is that faith is required for currency to exist in the first place, which actually is a little bit of a sticky point for us as Christians, because we need to place faith in it for it to exist, but not so much faith that we really begin to believe in it and depend on it. So with that in mind, when this poor widow in today's story with Jesus put in the 2 copper coins, which is all she had left, it was an actual act of faith. It was a bold statement in a world that had placed faith in their currency. And she said, I believe that God will take care of me without having these things. And, it shouldn't be ignored that she gave both of the 2 copper coins. She could have just given one and it would have been half of everything she had. But she did give both, meaning it was the most complete act of faith to put in everything, as opposed to some of the others who might have been putting in large sums, but maybe not the leap of faith that she took. So let's get back to those 2 questions I asked in the beginning. Why is it important for me to give to God? when, after all, God already owns everything? And second, how can I feel my giving to God even more? Really, only you are going to know the answers to how your giving to God affects you. But no matter what you give or how much you give, know that giving has an effect. Giving changes us. Giving to God changes us for the better, especially when we give in great ways as this poor widow did, especially because we give as an act of worship in a world that's so dependent on money, currency. We say we believe God will take care of us without these things. So thank you for joining with me on again for one of these brief Bible dives and with Beautiful Savior Lutheran Church in Bloomfield Hills, Michigan. If you'd like to learn more about our congregation, go to our website, bslcmi.org. We'd also love for you to subscribe to the YouTube channel, select to receive notifications, and learn more about what we're doing. Now, go out and love God and love your neighbors.